Hey guys, it's Ellie. Welcome back to Bite-Sized Book of Mormon. I'm glad to have you with me. So, if you've never been here before, this is just a podcast where we read through one chapter of the Book of Mormon each episode, and I give a little bit of context, a little bit of insight, a little bit of good times, so stick around. So, if you remember last episode, we read Alma chapter 52, in which Teancum, Captain Moroni, and Lehi take back a Lamanite-possessed city that got taken away from the Nephites. And how they get that city back is fascinating, because they use very satanic adjacent tactics. I don't like really using the word satanic, but they're using tactics that Satan uses on us to tempt us, and that is why the story is in the chapter, to teach us. And so that is such an interesting chapter to read when you're trying to figure out how to defend yourself against Satan, or how to understand how temptations work. And it's really, really cool. And so go ahead and listen to that chapter if you haven't already. But yeah, I think without further ado, let's read Alma chapter 53. And it came to pass that they did set guards over the prisoners of the Lamanites, and did compel them to go forth and bury their dead, yea, and also the dead of the Nephites who were slain. And Moroni placed men over them to guard them while they should perform their labors. And Moroni went to the city of Mulek with Lehi, and took command of the city, and gave it unto Lehi. Now behold, this Lehi was a man who had been with Moroni in the more part of his battles, and he was a man like unto Moroni, and they rejoiced in each other's safety. Yea, they were beloved by each other, and also beloved by all the people of Nephi. And it came to pass that after the Lamanites had finished burying their dead, and also the dead of the Nephites, they were marched back into the land Bountiful, and Teancum, by the orders of Moroni, caused that they should commence laboring in digging a ditch round about the land, or the city, Bountiful. And he caused that they should build a breastwork of timbers upon the inner bank of the ditch, and they cast up dirt out of the ditch against the breastwork of timbers, and thus they did cause the Lamanites to labor until they had encircled the city of Bountiful round about with a strong wall of timbers and earth to an exceeding height. And this city became an exceeding stronghold ever after, and in this city they did guard the prisoners of the Lamanites, yea, even within a wall which they had caused them to build with their own hands. Now Moroni was compelled to cause the Lamanites to labor, because it was easy to guard them while at their labor, and he desired all his forces when he should make an attack upon the Lamanites. It is in fact hilarious to me that the Lamanites are currently being held in a city, Bountiful, that they built the wall for. I'm sure the city had some sort of border before, but now the Lamanites themselves dug the ditches and built the walls and built the pickets that are now fortifying that city. When it is those very fortifications on the city of Mulek that made it so hard for the Nephites to take that city back from them. I think it's so interesting the role that these fortifications play. Because first, they're a defense against the Lamanites and they stop them from getting in, but the next time that Amalekite comes in with his army, they get into those fortified cities, and then those fortified cities have the reverse effect, where they actually make it harder for that city to get retaken. And now finally, they're serving their original purpose back. So they've flip-flopped back, and now they are once again defending the city of Bountiful. And in fact, now they're even serving a new secondary purpose, where they're keeping the Lamanite prisoners in. So they're keeping the dangerous Lamanites out, and the prisoners in. So anyways, these fortifications are very interesting when it comes to how they're interacting with the wars of the Nephites and the Lamanites. It's almost like they're a character unto themselves. I don't know, it's just kind of cool. And it came to pass that Moroni had thus gained a victory over one of the greatest of the armies of the Lamanites, and had obtained possession of the city of Mulek, which was one of the strongest holds of the Lamanites in the land of Nephi. And thus he had also built a stronghold to retain his prisoners. And it came to pass that he did no more attempt a battle with the Lamanites in that year, but he did employ his men in preparing for war, yea, and in making fortifications to guard against the Lamanites, yea, and also delivering their women and their children from famine and affliction, and providing food for their armies. And now it came to pass that the armies of the Lamanites on the west sea, south while in the absence of Moroni, on account of some intrigue amongst the Nephites, which caused dissensions amongst them, had gained some ground over the Nephites, yea, insomuch that they had obtained possession of a number of their cities in that part of the land. And thus became of iniquity amongst themselves, yea, because of dissensions and intrigue among themselves, they were placed in the most dangerous circumstances. And now behold, I have somewhat to say concerning the people of Ammon, who in the beginning were Lamanites, but by Ammon and his brethren, or rather by the power and word of God, they had been converted unto the Lord. And they had been brought down into the land of Zarahemla, and had ever since been protected by the Nephites. And because of their oath, they had been kept from taking up arms against their brethren, for they had taken an oath that they never would shed blood more. And according to their oath, they would have perished, yea, they would have suffered themselves to have fallen into the hands of their brethren, had it not been for the pity and the exceeding love which Ammon and his brethren had for them. And for this cause they were brought down into the land of Zarahemla, and they ever had been protected by the Nephites. But it came to pass that when they saw the danger and the many afflictions and tribulations which the Nephites bore for them, they were moved with compassion, and they were desirous to take up arms in the defense of their country. So if you remember, a few chapters ago, and by a few chapters I mean many chapters ago, there's this group of Lamanites that Nephite missionaries actually converted, and they stopped calling themselves Lamanites, they started calling themselves Anti-Nephi-Lehies, and they moved in with the Nephites, and they made an oath to never again fight or to shed blood ever. And so they literally took all of their physical swords and weapons and buried them in an actual literal hole in the ground, which is awesome and extremely symbolic, and it's so cool. But that means that they can't defend themselves, and the Lamanites hate them because they used to be Lamanites, and the Lamanites hate that they left and they now live among the Nephites. Maybe they're jealous or something, I don't know. And so they can't defend themselves, and so they're forced to rely on the charity of the Nephites to defend them. But what I love about why they're brought up here is the fact that they see how much the Nephites do for them, and I imagine that they're extremely grateful. And it says in verse 13 that they were moved with compassion, and they wanted to help, they wanted to do anything they could to help in the battle. But because of their oath, they wouldn't. Not they couldn't, but they wouldn't, because they cared so much about their covenant that they made with God. So anyways, I absolutely love that the Anti-Nephi-Lehies get called back to, because they're such a cool group of people. And another thing that I want to point out, which happens a little bit before the Anti-Nephi-Lehies are mentioned, is that even though Moroni is not attacking the Lamanites, he is never idle. He's having his armies help the people, he's having them build fortifications, he's having them help feed people. So he is never idle, he's never just sitting around waiting for the next attack. Even while Lamanites possess their cities, now not only on the east, but also on the west. Now they're getting properly flanked by the Lamanites. They've taken over cities on both sides, which is a very dangerous strategic position for them, and that is partially why Moroni is never rested. He's never idle, he's never done. He's always preparing more, he's always supporting the people using his armies, and he's always vigilant. And that is something that I think is cool. But behold, as they were about to take their weapons of war, they were overpowered by the persuasions of Helaman and his brethren, for they were about to break the oath which they had made. And Helaman feared lest by doing so they should lose their souls. Therefore all those who had entered into this covenant were compelled to behold their brethren wade through their afflictions in their dangerous circumstances at this time. But behold, it came to pass that they had many sons, who had not entered into a covenant that they would not take their weapons of war to defend themselves against their enemies. Therefore, they did assemble themselves together at this time, as many as were able to take up arms, and they called themselves Nephites. And they entered into a covenant to fight for the liberty of the Nephites, yea, to protect the land unto the laying down of their lives, yea, even they covenanted that they never would give up their liberty, but they would fight in all cases to protect the Nephites and themselves from bondage. Now behold, there were 2,000 of those young men who entered into this covenant and took their weapons of war to defend their country. And now behold, as they never had hitherto been a disadvantage to the Nephites, they became now at this period of time also a great support, for they took their weapons of war, and they would that Helaman should be their leader. And they were all young men, and they were exceedingly valiant for courage, and also for strength and activity. But behold, this was not all. They were men who were true at all times in whatsoever thing they were entrusted. Yea, they were men of truth and soberness, for they had been taught to keep the commandments of God and to walk uprightly before him. And now it came to pass that Helaman did march at the head of his 2,000 stripling soldiers to the support of the people in the borders of the land on the south by the West Sea. And thus ended the 28th year of the reign of the judges over the people of Nephi. Enter stage left the stripling warriors, one of the most recognizable and interesting armies to be found in the war chapters. I absolutely love this group of children. And they are children. Why do you think they're called stripling warriors? Stripling literally means young. These are young men. Even though in these verses it refers to them as men, they're kids. They could have been as small as young teenagers, marching in this army fearlessly to defend the Nephites. And something that I think is so cool is that at the end of verse 16, where it describes these sons of the Anti-Nephi-Lehies that kind of arose to take up the position of a soldier, at the very end of that verse it says, and they called themselves Nephites. So if you know the history of the Anti-Nephi-Lehite people, you'll notice they are very obviously not named Lamanites or Nephites. They're kind of this middle thing. They're their own entity, kind of. They took control of their identity after they left the Lamanites because they no longer wanted to be associated with the Lamanites. So clearly to this group of people, names mean a lot. And they don't call themselves Nephites, as far as we can tell. They either call themselves Ammonites or Anti-Nephi-Lehies. Ammonites because that's who converted them and brought them over to the Nephite lands. Again, they don't call themselves Nephites until these stripling warriors joined the Nephite army. Now they call themselves Nephites. Now that they're fighting for the liberty of their brethren, the Nephites, they are now one of them. They are now part of this group of God-fearing people. And that is so cool, and I think that's really important that this small detail mentions they called themselves Nephites. Because to this specific group of people, like I've mentioned, names mean a lot. And so I think that that is a poignant thing that Mormon made sure to point that out about these young men. They clearly have pride in what they're doing. It's so cool. I love this so much. Imagine being a young teenage boy and watching your parents almost break a covenant that they've held for years of nonviolence just to help the people that have helped them so much. And instead of being like, well, that's their problem, must be hard, you stand up and you go, I will help. My parents can't help because they covenanted with God that they will never pick up a weapon again. But I didn't, and I'm going to help you. Even though I'm a kid, even though I'm maybe even as young as 13, I will help because I can. And I know that this is God's people, and that we have the protection from Him, and that should we stay faithful, we will prevail. That is their testimony, and it is stunningly strong, especially for how young they are. Imagine how faithful their parents must have been to see that faith and testimony shining through their children. That is so cool. The parents of these stripling warriors, even though they aren't really characters unto themselves, shine through their children, and you can see the influence that they've had on them with how strong and brave and faithful their children are. I want to be a parent like that. I want to be a parent that raises a child that will do this. This is so fascinatingly bold. Oh my gosh. So yeah, welcome to the stripling warriors. Let's see how they fare in the coming chapters. So the standout verse for this chapter is going to be verse 20, which says, and they were all young men, and they were exceedingly valiant for courage, and also for strength and activity. But behold, this was not all. They were men who were true at all times in whatsoever thing they were entrusted. So this verse reminds me of Captain Moroni. And if you remember, Mormon, who is abridging this record, loves Captain Moroni. He always highlights the stories where Captain Moroni is just flexing his awesomeness. And what makes Captain Moroni so cool is that he balances faith-based preparation and works-based preparation. So he, of course, is an army general, but instead of just preparing fortifications and training his armies, etc., he also prepares the spiritual health of the people he's defending, because he knows that if he has God on his side, if the people that he's defending are righteous, he will have the Spirit with him, and he will have that edge. And so he balances fortifications and preparations in that sense with teaching the people and unifying them around the gospel. So, as I've said multiple times, Captain Moroni can do both. And this verse shows that so can the stripling warriors. They are not only, as it says, very courageous and also strong, but it says, behold, this is not all. They were men who were true at all times. And then the next verse goes on to say how righteous they are and how they walk in obedience to God's commandments, etc., etc. And so these men, these boys, can do both. They are little tiny Captain Moronis. And so anyways, I'm excited to see how this army fares. I mean, obviously I know the stories, but I won't spoil it for you if you don't, so there you go. But yeah, that is the episode for today. I hope you enjoyed. Oh my goodness, I'm so excited to read more about the stripling warriors. I love these kids. They're so cool and so inspiring. So yeah, there's just a few links down in the show notes if you want to check them out. The first one is a let me know what you learned link that will just let you chat with me, should you feel like it. Although it's more likely you'll actually get to chat with me if you DM me on Instagram, but you know what? Either way. Next, there's a handful of links to access a digital copy of the Book of Mormon, so if you don't have your own copy, but you want to read along or make a study plan or just find a chapter that you like, you can go ahead and click those down below. Next, there's a quick support the show link, so if you really like what I do and you want to support it, that's how you do it. And if you do, that'd be greatly appreciated. Next, there's a link to the YouTube channel, so if you want to access the podcast on YouTube, you can go ahead and subscribe there. I also post my YouTube shorts onto there whenever I make them. And yeah, it is a good time, so I'll see you there. And finally, we are on Instagram, so if you want to find me where I'm the most active, you're going to want to follow me there, because I put trivia, I put updates on my story, I put reels, etc. And yeah, it's a very good time, so I'll see you there. But yeah, that's all I've got for you today. I'll talk to you later. Bye.